They called me a failure, not once, not quietly, repeatedly, loudly, in ways that were meant to be heard. I never finished college. I divorced my first husband at a time when women simply did not do that. I did not own a home until I was 52. I never had a prestigious career. I never drove a new car or wore expensive clothes or lived in the kind of house that made other people nod with approval when you told them your address. By every measure that the world I grew up in used to measure a woman's worth, I failed. And I am here to tell you, sitting in this chair at 90 years old, in this small, simple home, with this ordinary, unremarkable life that the world would still call insufficient, that I am the happiest woman I have ever known. Not the richest, not the most successful, not the most impressive, the happiest. And I have spent a great deal of time in my 90 years thinking about why that is, about what I accidentally got right while I was busy failing at everything the world told me I was supposed to get right. What I found, the real answer, the honest answer, is going to surprise you. Because it is not what the self-help books say. It is not what the motivational speakers say. It is something much simpler and much harder and much more available to you right now than you probably realize. Stay with me. My name is Vivian Rose Calloway. I am 90 years old. I was born the third of 5 children in a small house that always had more people in it than it had rooms. My mother worked. My father worked. Nobody talked about dreams or potential or what you were going to be when you grew up. You just grew up. And then you figured out what to do with that. I was married twice. The first time to a man my family approved of, which should have been my first warning sign. The second time to a man who made me laugh every single day for 31 years until the morning he did not wake up. I worked as a seamstress, a school dinner lady, a care assistant, and for 11 beautiful years, I ran a tiny alteration shop out of the front room of my house that never made me wealthy, but made me happier than any job I have ever heard described. I have 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and more mornings than I can count that I woke up and felt genuinely, completely, without performance, glad to be alive. That is not a small thing. In a world full of people, with far more than I ever had who cannot say the same, that is not a small thing at all. From the time I was old enough to understand what was being asked of me, the world had a very specific picture of what my life should look like. Educated, married, once correctly, to someone appropriate. Children raised quietly and well. A home that reflected your husband's success. The appearance that never let the difficult days show. Opinions that did not make anyone uncomfortable. Needs that never became inconvenient. And above all, contentment. The performed kind. The kind that sits with its hands folded and smiles, and never once admits that something is wrong or missing or less than what was promised. I tried. I genuinely tried. I enrolled in the college course my mother wanted me to take, and lasted 1 semester before I understood with complete clarity that sitting in those rooms was going to slowly extinguish something in me that I could not afford to lose. I married the man my family chose, and spent 7 years trying to become the woman that choice required me to be. Quieter, more accommodating, less inconvenient, less, as my mother-in-law once said to my face with a smile that was not actually a smile, much. I failed at all of it, beautifully, completely. In ways that scandalized my family and confused my community and left me standing at 34 years old with a divorce, no degree, 2 small children, and absolutely no idea what came next. And standing there, in that exact failure, in that exact uncertainty, in that exact mess, I felt something I had not felt in years, like myself. Just completely, uncomplicatedly, terrifyingly myself. There was a specific afternoon I want to tell you about. I was 36 years old. My 2 children were at school. I was sitting on the floor of my kitchen, not in a chair, on the floor, because the chair felt too formal for how I actually felt. eating toast and drinking tea and doing absolutely nothing productive. And I noticed something. I was not anxious. I was not performing. I was not managing anyone's impression of me or planning how to be more of what someone needed me to be. I was just sitting on my kitchen floor eating toast. And it was the most at peace I had felt since I was a child who did not yet know that her job was to become something specific for other people. That afternoon, I made a decision that I did not have words for at the time, but that I have spent the rest of my life understanding more deeply. I decided that I was going to stop using other people's picture of a good life as the measuring stick for my own. That I was going to find out, slowly, imperfectly, with a great deal of trial and error, what actually made me feel like I was genuinely living rather than competently performing. It sounds simple. It is the hardest thing I have ever done. Because the voices that tell you what you should be do not go quiet just because you decide to stop listening. They get louder at first. They recruit allies, family members, old friends. The internal voice that has memorized every criticism ever aimed at you and replays them with impressive efficiency at 3 a.m. But I kept going. Toward the floor, sitting, toast eating, genuinely myself version of my life. And every step I took toward it felt more like arriving home than any achievement I had ever been praised for. Let me tell you what my life actually looked like. The life that the world called insufficient. I learned to sew from my grandmother. Then I taught myself to do alterations. Then I opened my little shop in my front room with a second-hand machine and a sign my son painted by hand that was slightly crooked and absolutely perfect. I charged honest prices and I did honest work, and the women who came to me came back, not just with clothes, but with conversation, with problems, with cups of tea they brought themselves, because they knew I always had the kettle on. That shop was never profitable enough to impress anyone, but it was mine in a way that nothing performed for other people's approval ever is. Every stitch was real. Every customer was real. The satisfaction at the end of a good day of work was real in a way I had never felt in the jobs I took because they looked appropriate on paper. I married again at 44. Not because I needed to, not because the world was still asking me to, because I met a man named Clarence who sat across from me at a friend's dinner table and listened to me talk for 45 minutes about hemlines and seemed genuinely interested and asked follow-up questions that nobody had ever asked me before. We were not a picture-perfect couple by anyone's external measure. We were two middle-aged people with complicated histories and imperfect bodies and deeply held opinions about very small things. And we were happy, genuinely, daily, unperformatively happy, for 31 years. When he died, I grieved with everything I had, and then I kept going. Because he would have been the first person to tell me that stopping was not an option he was willing to accept for me. I have had 90 years to think about this, and I want to tell you what I actually believe happiness is. Not the version sold to you in advertisements or promised in productivity systems or implied by the lives of people whose highlight reels you consume on small glowing screens. Happiness is not the absence of difficulty. My life has had profound difficulty. Loss and grief and fear and failure and mornings where getting up felt like a physical act of will rather than a natural response to a new day. Happiness is not the presence of enough. I have never had enough by the world's definition. I have always had just enough by mine, and those are completely different measurements. Happiness, real, sustained, 90 years deep happiness, is the feeling of being genuinely yourself in the life you are actually living. Not the performed self, not the self that exists to satisfy other people's expectations. The actual self, the one that eats toast on kitchen floors and cries at things that probably should not make you cry and laughs too loud sometimes, and has opinions that not everyone agrees with and needs things that not everyone understands. That self, freely expressed in a life honestly built around what it actually needs, is the source of every genuinely happy moment I have ever experienced. And here is what I want you to truly understand. I did not achieve that self by succeeding at what the world asked of me. I found it by failing at it so completely that I finally had no choice but to stop trying to be what someone else needed and start finding out who I actually was. My failure was the door, and walking through it was the best thing I ever did. I want to speak directly to you now, specifically to you, the one who is watching this because something in the title felt personal. If you have been called a failure by someone else or by the voice inside your own head that has memorized society's measuring stick and applies it to you constantly, I want you to hear this from someone who has been exactly where you are and lived long enough to see the full picture. The measuring stick is wrong, not slightly wrong, not wrong in certain circumstances. Fundamentally, structurally, completely wrong for measuring what actually matters about a human life. It measures income, and it cannot measure joy. It measures achievement, and it cannot measure peace. It measures what you have accumulated, and it cannot measure what you have genuinely experienced. It measures how your life looks from the outside, and it is completely blind to how your life feels from the inside. And the feeling from the inside is the only part that belongs to you. The woman who followed every rule and arrived at the correct destination and stood in the correct house with the correct credentials and the correct relationship and the correct appearance. If she wakes up every morning with a hollow feeling where her actual life should be, she has failed at the only thing that was ever truly worth succeeding at. And the woman who failed by every external measure, who divorced, who left, who chose the small shop over the impressive career, who picked the man who asked about hemlines over the man her family approved of, if she wakes up every morning genuinely glad to be herself in the life she has built, she has succeeded at that same thing completely. You are not failing. You are possibly just refusing to succeed at something that was never worth succeeding at in the first place. Give yourself permission to measure differently. It will change everything. After 90 years, I do not claim certainty about many things, but I claim it about these three. First, approval is a terrible foundation for a life. I spent years building on it, and every structure I built on that foundation eventually collapsed because approval is conditional and conditions change, and when they do, everything built on them comes down. Build on something that belongs to you, your values, your genuine joy, your honest self. That foundation does not move when the world's opinion does. Second, the people who love you for who you actually are the only ones worth arranging your life around, not the ones who love the version of you that meets their expectations. The ones who know the full picture, the complicated, imperfect, occasionally embarrassing full picture, and choose you anyway. Those people are rare. When you find them, choose them back without hesitation. Third, it is never too late to stop performing and start living. I was 36 when I sat on that kitchen floor and chose myself. Some people find it at 50, some at 70. I have heard of people finding it in their 80s and those remaining years becoming the most alive of their entire lives. The door is open for as long as you are breathing. Walk through it whenever you are ready. But do not wait longer than you have to. I am 90 years old. Society called me a failure. I never had the credentials or the house or the career or the perfectly arranged life that I was told was the only one worth living. I have also woken up almost every morning of my adult life genuinely glad to be alive. I have loved people deeply and been loved back the same way. I have done work that felt real. I have sat on kitchen floors eating toast and felt more at peace than people with everything the world calls success have described feeling in their entire lives. I do not know what the world would call that. I call it a life. A real one. Honest and imperfect and completely mine. And standing at the end of it, looking back across 90 years of flaws and toast and crooked signs, and Clarence asking about hemlines and children and grief and laughter, and the particular light that comes through my front window on winter mornings, I would not trade a single failure, not one, because every single one of them led me here, to this chair, to this life, to this extraordinary, ordinary happiness that the world never had a measuring stick for, because the world was always looking at the wrong things. Stop failing at their life. Start living yours. My name is Vivian Rose Calloway. I am 90 years old. Society called me a failure, and I have never been more at peace with anything in my life. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a cup of tea getting cold on my windowsill. And I have learned not to let the good things go cold while I am busy explaining myself to anyone.